Detective Lance pulled up in front of the farmhouse, marveling at the way the corn rattled in the fields. The corn was wrong, he could tell that right away, and Lance could honestly say that he had never seen corn look that way. The husks were brown, the corn inside turning black as it rotted on the stalk. He had been impressed by the amount of corn surrounding the farmhouse, acres of skeletal stalks, that made the farmhouse feel like an island in a dead corn sea. The police cars out front looked out of place in the dirt yard, and as he mounted the stairs, one of the rural cops came out to meet him. Lance was on loan from the nearby precinct, and the clock was ticking. He had about 36 hours to find anything that would lead them to 5 missing people. They needed his help in discovering what might have happened to the Murphy clan. "Bring me up to speed," he said, nodding at the man as he came onto the porch. He looked like any other state trooper, his coat trimmed in fur, his hat leaning into something more cowboy than law enforcement. He tugged a pack of smokes out of his pocket and lit one, the smoke curling up against the rafters of the porch as he assessed the big city detective they had called to help. Whatever he saw, he seemed unimpressed, and his smile was more than a little mocking. "Well, well, by all means, sir, let me fill you in on what us bumpkins have managed to turn up." He flipped open a spiral notebook and started flipping through the crumpled pages. Lance didn't much care for his tone, but he held his tongue as the trooper flipped through the notes. The county Mounties had been working the case for about a week, and had no idea what had become of the small farm family. The report said that the Murphys, 2 adults and 3 children, had suddenly vanished from their large farm. They'd also disappeared right around harvest time, leaving their cash crop in the ground. This made their sudden vanishing act all the more confusing, and Lance was eager to get his teeth in this one. Let's see. On October 23rd, their closest neighbor noticed the crops in the field had changed. They said it appeared that frost had killed all their corn overnight and just left it to rot. This was at odds since it had never gotten below 50 degrees on any given night recently. They came to check on the family and noticed that they were gone. Last time anyone could remember seeing them was on the 12th when they came into town to buy pumpkins for the kids. The children were out of school for the harvest, and they were getting ready to bring in the corn when they suddenly vanished. That's all we know, and that's why we called you in. I think the sheriff hopes a fresh set of eyes will prove useful. Have you found anything inside? No blood or bodies, if that's what you mean. We've found nothing to make us consider foul play, and no signs of robbery either. There's no reason at all that they should have left their house, and their vehicles are still there too. So, unless they walked out on foot with a kid under 3 and 2 under 18, we have to assume that they were abducted for some reason. Lance nodded, thinking over what they knew and adding it to the small amount that he assumed. With kids present, there was a pretty good chance that it had been a kidnapping. This was the Midwest, and it wasn't uncommon to have a whole family get picked up by traffickers, or worse. The location of the farm would mean that it would make it easy for them to disappear without notice. All the corn would mean that their crime scene would go unnoticed, even if they tried to run. They would likely never find the Murphys, not alive anyway, but Lance had to try. He was one of the department's best detectives, and he had a lot to live up to. "Show me the house. Let's see what I can find." "All right, but we've pretty much gone over this whole place with a fine-tooth comb. I'm not sure there's much else to find." After an hour and a half of searching the scene, Lance feared he might have been right. The farmhouse had 3 rooms. One was clearly a bedroom. The other one was a big room for the kids. The third was a big open room containing a kitchen, a living room, and a sitting room. The home was pristine, recently clean and freshly swept, and everything looked far too orderly for a kidnapping scene. The dishes were done. There were clothes laid out for the next day. There was no sign of a struggle or a fight, and Lance couldn't figure out how they had been taken so neatly. He was searching the kids' room, looking for anything, when he came across the journal. It was nothing, just a salt and pepper mead notebook left on the floor as if it were a tent for natives. It was the most out-of-place thing in the house, and it stood out to Lance for some reason. He couldn't have said why, but his eyes tracked back to that book no matter where he was in the room. As he left, he scooped it up and took it with him as he went back to the living room. Lance opened to the page it had been left on as he walked up the hall, reading what appeared to be an entry for October 10th. "Daddy's mad. Someone keeps stealing our scarecrows. They just disappear out of the field, and Daddy's getting pretty upset about it. He's certain that Dale is stealing them, but Dale swears it isn't him. Scarecrows are pretty heavy, so I'm not sure how he could steal them by himself. The field looks so empty without them. It's just corn as far as the eye can see. Sometimes I stand on the porch and just watch it wave in the breeze, hearing it rustle as the stalks chuckle together. It used to be comforting, but it's a little creepy lately. The rustling makes me think of a monster moving in the corn, and I've spent less time in the corn by myself. Hopefully, whoever's stealing our scarecrows will get caught. That way Daddy won't be so mad all the time. It was signed, Register Murphy. Register Murphy had been the middle child, Lance remembered, as he flipped to the next page. He was supposed to be about 8, and by his writing, Lance could believe it. It read like a typical child's journal, but Lance found himself intrigued all the same. If the kid had seen something, maybe he'd written about it in the journal. Something like that could help him narrow down the culprit or even a motive. Lance furrowed his brow and turned to the next page. There was indeed a visitor, but it wasn't the one that Lance had expected. October 11th. There was a surprise in the field this morning. Daddy was standing on the porch this morning when we came out to work, and he was scratching his head as he looked into the east field. Standing on a brand new post, its body turning rapidly, was a brand new scarecrow. It was dressed in a dark blue suit, a tall top hat on its round head, and the head was a small orange pumpkin. I thought maybe he was turning in the breeze, but then I realized that there wasn't any wind. The corn was still, and the usual rattle was gone. The scarecrow just kind of moved on its own. It danced something smooth and graceful. His arms were boneless, his legs kicking freely, and as the post wiggled around, he continued to dance and sway. I thought Daddy would be mad, but he seemed pretty happy about the scarecrow. He thinks it's funny, a dancing scarecrow, and he says it'll bring luck to our crops. His mother told him a story about a dancing scarecrow that brought rain and grew the corn 30 feet high. As he told it to us, I could see that it meant a lot to him, and he thought it was a big honor to have a dancing scarecrow in one of our fields. We were farming in the field he was in that day, and I couldn't help but watch him as he danced and swayed. Daddy seemed real happy, smiling every time he looked at the thing, but I was a little creeped out by it. I was working close to it, and I couldn't help but notice when it turned its head to look at me. The greasy face was far too lifelike, and it seemed to linger on me every time it got close. We brought in the corn, but I dreamed about that dancing scarecrow last night. It was dancing right in front of me, its mouth screaming as it twisted. Its dance became more and more violent, straw flying as it flailed around. Its screams started sounding like laughter, and as it fixed its eyes on me, it started to whisper, "He comes! He comes! He comes!" Who is this person he's talking about? What'll happen when he comes? Register Murphy. A dancing scarecrow? What the hell was that? Lance wondered. Had the kidnappers been dressed as scarecrows or something? There was no way that one person had kidnapped 5 people and spirited them away with no one noticing. Lance turned the page and read the next entry, seeing a pattern as the young boy laid out the days before his disappearance. The more he read, the less childish it sounded. The longer he read, the more it sounded like Register Murphy was detailing the worst days of his life. October 12th. There are 2 of them now. The new one is dressed in a yellow suit with a matching hat, and despite looking brand new, it looks like it was colored with pee-pee. They stand side by side in the fields, kicking their legs and swinging their arms, looking like they're trapped in a windstorm. Daddy clapped when he saw them, saying that this was exactly what he wanted. The story said that more scarecrows would show up, and I almost shook when he said it. More scarecrows? How many more? There were 2 kicking and dancing, smiling their greasy grins as they wiggled around. I was working alone in the east field today, picking the fields as far from the scarecrows as I could, when I heard them whispering. They were talking, just like they had in my dream, whispering about coming or whoever he was. I heard the corn rustle as it came over in the row next to me, and suddenly there they were, both of them dancing, spinning in the air like typhoons, and I could hear them whispering and screaming all around me. I covered my ears as they swirled, and when Dale found me crying, they were both gone. As I lay in bed that night, I heard them rustling amongst the corn plants, their bodies lashing wildly against the corn stalks, and the sound they made my skin crawl. October 13th. Daddy's gotten weird. When I came out to work today, he was talking to the scarecrows. There are 3 of them now, one of them in a blue suit, one in a yellow suit, and the newest one in a gray suit with a matching top hat. They were all side by side in the east field, dancing and swaying as they held Daddy with their black eyes. They seemed to be gently swaying, not the usual violent dancing they do, and they almost seemed to be listening to him. Listening or talking. He didn't help us today. We all went to work in the fields, picking corn and packing produce, but Daddy stayed with the scarecrows. He looked strange out in the field in his sleeveless t-shirt and his sleep pants, and when Mama went to go talk to him, he told her to go back inside. We were all on the porch carving pumpkins when she came back. Even Thomas was hacking away at his pumpkin's face with a butter knife, and Mama looked scared. She said that Daddy just wasn't feeling well, and when all the pumpkins were lit, he was still standing out there in the dark, talking with those scarecrows. I heard them out there dancing again last night, but I never heard Daddy come back inside. Register Murphy. Lance flipped back and read the last bit again. His dad, Marcus Murphy, was acting strangely. That could explain why his family had suddenly just up and disappeared. Maybe whoever these scarecrows were, they had help from the father. It was too soon to tell, but it was a working theory. That would explain why the vehicles that the family owned were still here. If the people running those scarecrows had their own vehicles, they could have disappeared easily without a trace. He kept reading, wanting more information, hoping for some other clue as to what had happened. October 14th. Daddy was still in the field, and so was a new scarecrow. He was in a green suit, and it looked like it was woven out of grass. All their heads are pumpkins, but unlike ours, they don't look squashy or attract flies. They just sit up there and smile and stare and look real creepy. Mama's worried about Daddy. All she does is sit at the window and watch him while he's in the field. He just stays in the field for some reason, listening to the scarecrows and talking with them. He moved around the cornfield sometimes, not picking or boxing, but just walking around aimlessly. Dale and I have been doing most of the work, but sometimes I can see the scarecrows following me. I felt like they might get me when it was just the two of them, but now there are four, and it feels like they might trap me out there. They grin at me from out of the corn, watching me work, and when I try to tell Dale about it, he just tells me to stop being a spaz. Last night they were all over the field, and I had to put my head under the pillow to stop from hearing them. They sound scary, and their whispers are even louder now. They say he's coming, and that he's gonna get us. I don't know who he is, but I don't want him to get me. If he's as scary as the scarecrows are, I don't want him anywhere near the house. October 15th. Daddy's gone, but there's a new scarecrow out there now. This one's dressed in orange, and it matches the pumpkin he wears as a head. Mama told us to stay inside and went to go look for Daddy in the field. She couldn't find him out there and told us all to stay inside today. It started to drizzle a little, and while Thomas watched TV and Dale read, I sat by the window and watched the scarecrows. There are 5 of them now, and each of them are dancing just like the others. The rain doesn't hurt their spirits at all. They sit out in the rain and dance and sway on their posts, rustling the corn and sending streams of water flying off when they crash against them. It's weird, I wouldn't swear to it, but they look closer to the house somehow. Like when Daddy stood out there talking to them, they seemed farther from the house. Now I can see the rain as it slides off their faces. They're not on the porch, but it feels like they're close enough to throw a rock through the window if they wanted to. Thomas doesn't like them much. He came to sit with me and he said they were scary. He says they came and looked in his window at night, and he always hides and cries until they go away. I never checked to see if they came to my window. Maybe tonight I'll stay up a little and wait to see. This was looking more and more like a case of psychosis. The father had a break from reality and had done something to his family. Whatever this dancing scarecrow nonsense was didn't matter. It was pretty clear that something was going on with Marcus Murphy. Something tickled at the back of his mind as he read, though, and Lance couldn't help but think about something a friend had been telling him about. The scarecrows, the constant use of he, reminded him of Stephen's case. He shook it off, though, not wanting to muddy the waters with a different case. He called over one of the officers and asked if they could see if the family vehicles were all accounted for. He wanted them to check into places on the property where bodies could be hidden, like a well or an old drainage line or something. He suspected that the bodies had been easy for Marcus to move after they were dead, and wanted to know if there was anywhere on the property that they had found blood. "Nowhere, sir. There's not even a slaughterhouse. Marcus grew corn for the ethanol plant. Corn's pretty much his only crop. A lot of farmers out here grow mostly corn, and Marcus used every acre he had for his corn crop." Lance nodded. "What about a basement? Somewhere he might have taken them to kill them?" "No basement. Barn's clean. House is clean. The men are searching the field for anything that might be suspicious." Lance let the officer get back to it, noticing the deputy he had talked to when he came in, eyeballing him as he spoke with a large man in mirrored sunglasses. He returned to reading, seeing the possible sheriff nodding his head in his direction. They likely wanted to know what he knew, but he wasn't ready to tell them just yet. He didn't have a full picture, but he suspected it might be fuller than theirs. October 16th. "Someone smashed our pumpkins last night. I can see them on the porch through the windows. Their guts have been scattered all over the porch, and their shells are lying across the yard. Daddy's still missing, and Mama won't let us leave the house. We found her on the porch this morning, and when Dale helped her inside, she sounded like something had scared her half to death. Dale didn't want Thomas and I to hear, but Mama said we needed to hear about it nonetheless. As she drank the coffee that Dale had made for her, she told us about how Daddy had called her out to the field, but it hadn't been Daddy. She had been woken up by the sound of him calling her name through the window. She'd seen someone standing there, their silhouette tall and broad like his had been. He had called her by name, and then moved towards the field as she went out in her nightshirt. The fields had been dark, the corn lit only by the silvery moon overhead, and Mama had followed the sound of crunchy husks underfoot. She could see him as she walked, and had hurried to catch up with him, but then the corn on either side had started rustling. Something was to her left, her right, behind her, and Mama felt hemmed in. She stopped following Daddy, and that was likely all that had saved her life. It seemed he had been hiding the sickle somewhere out of sight, and when he turned to slash her, she was farther back than he thought. Mama ran, bumping into one of the scarecrows as she careened into the field. Daddy was hot on her heels, and she ran blindly as she tried to lose him. The scarecrows popped up randomly as the rows of corn swung by on ghostly rails. Her legs burned and her face was wind-burnt as the stalks battered against her. She ran for her life, running on pure adrenaline. She didn't know how long she had run. She didn't know how far, and as the sun peeked up over the horizon, she collapsed on the porch in a heap as she prepared to be killed. When she opened her eyes again, it was morning, and Dale was helping her inside. There are 6 scarecrows now, and the newest one has a white suit and hat. They're all out there dancing now, swirling in the rain and rustling the corn plants. I think I can see Daddy out there if I look closely. He's still carrying the sickle, and there's something over his head, though I can't tell what it is. I'm scared. I don't understand what's going on, but I know we won't be going back into the field anytime soon. October 17th. Daddy is stalking the house from the fields. The new scarecrow, number 7, has a light pink suit. Most people would say it's supposed to be cute, but not me. It looks like old blood. Mama's standing at the window, watching Daddy as he peeks at us from the corn. His head is covered by a pumpkin now too, but it's not the same as the scarecrow's. His head is already starting to wilt, the pumpkin looking sad as he looks out through the eye holes. Thomas is crying, and Dale looks mad. He keeps pacing around, holding the old hatchet he used when we went camping. He keeps snarling out at Daddy like he's going to do something, and Mama seems worried that he will. It's getting dark now. I hope we make it till tomorrow. If you know something, Detective, it would be best if you shared it. Lance looked up from his notebook and into the reflective lenses of the sheriff. He was immensely fat, his belly pressed against his duty belt as he loomed over Detective Lance. He was grinning, but it was clear that his intentions were less than friendly. He was used to cowing his inferiors into doing what he wanted, but he might have overestimated his pull this time. Lance was not the sort to be cowed so easily. If I should learn anything that I think you need to know, Sheriff Leebrook, I'll be sure to let you know. Leebrook grinned, and Lance could see every one of his tobacco-stained teeth. That ain't quite how things work around here, hoss. We called you in on this one. That means I'm here to help you. That doesn't mean I work for you. Now, if you want me to be efficient at my job, let me work. Leebrook put his hands up and backed away, still smiling, but clearly not liking being rebuffed. Sure, you're the big-time detective after all." Lance looked back to the journal and continued reading, the cops now giving him a wide berth as they moved around him. October 18th. Dale left. He and Mama argued about it for hours, the two of them shouting in the back like they thought Thomas and I couldn't hear. Thomas has been crying in the living room, but Mama never came back out. Dale disappeared into the corn, the 8th Scarecrow seeming to turn to the side to admit him. This one's wearing a black suit, making him look like a reaper. When he turned back to look at the house, I could clearly see the scowl that was sketched into his face, making it look different from the rest. It's dark now. I can see my breath as it steams out of my mouth. Thomas is shivering, and Mama still hasn't come out of the back room. I can see the ice swirling on the glass. The corn outside is rattling differently tonight. I can hear the ice breaking off as it hits the ground. The scarecrows are very close now. I can see them in the dark, the moon casting their shadows across our home. The shadows slide greasily into the farmhouse, and I moved Thomas away from them and put him to bed on the couch instead. We're both wrapped in one of Mama's old Afghans, but it's so cold. It's almost hard to write. My fingers are so numb, and I don't think I'll be able to write much longer. Someone's coming out of the corn, someone on a horse. Daddy's with him, Dale too, and he's wearing armor like a knight. He has deer antlers on his head, and there's an axe over his shoulder. I can see his eyes. They're red like coals, and they're burning under his helmet. The closer he gets, the more frozen the windows get. I can't see anything now. It's too icy, but I can hear the clip-clop of his horse's hooves. I know I should be scared, but the cold is sinking in, and I'm getting tired. Thomas has stopped shivering, and I think I'm going to close my eyes for a few minutes. Lance felt his breath hitch as he read the last entry. The handwriting here was cramped, almost illegible, the scribbles of a child who was learning to write. He stood up suddenly, taking the notebook with him as he went for the door. The big-bellied sheriff tried to step in his path, but Lance sidestepped him, never stopping. The sheriff cawed angrily behind him, but Lance was out the door and across the dooryard before anyone could stop him. They would never find the family, no more than they would find any of the others who had disappeared under similar circumstances. As he drove away, he was already on the phone with the only person who might be able to use this information. "Steve, it's Lance. I've got something you need to see. I think I might have more information about your Green Man case." Good evening, everyone. It's me, Dr. Plague. Thank you so much for joining me for tonight's story. If you enjoyed tonight's story, and you're not already subscribed, why not go ahead and hit that subscribe button? Go ahead and hit that notification bell, so you don't miss any of the spooky stuff we do here. You could probably stand another story, right? There's plenty more where this came from. Don't forget to check out my playlists if you have a favorite. There's lots of links below to my latest book on Amazon, also to my Patreon if you think you might like to support the show in a more monetary fashion. Speaking of, let's go ahead and thank our patrons. Thanks to Janet for being our Spooky Skeleton tier contributor. Thanks to Xaronana, Emily Coltsfoot, Martha, and Marianne Schuler for being our Ghostly Reader tier contributors. Thanks, everyone. We just couldn't do the show without you. Patreon has all sorts of wonderful tiers. Our Ghostly Reader tiers get a book every time I write one, so at least twice a year, you get a signed copy of my latest book on your doorstep. But there are other rewards as well, having your name read out at the end, getting your spooky a little early, all kinds of things. So, what are you waiting for? Come on down and see what all the fuss is about. And as always, thanks for stopping by. Dr. Plague, signing off. Have a wonderful evening.